In a world where truth is rewritten daily and even memory is a fragile thread, one quiet disappearance marks the turning of a deeper tide. Syme is gone, erased not just from life, but from existence itself. Yet amid rocket bombs, parades, and a city's frenzied descent into hate week, something unexpected begins to bloom. In a secret room above a junk shop, love dares to exist. And in that delicate pause between illusions, Winston and Julia find a sliver of the past that refuses to die. But even paradise, no matter how hidden, casts a shadow. And that shadow is growing. Syme had disappeared. One morning, he simply wasn't at work. Some commented casually on his absence. By the next day, no one mentioned him. On the third, Winston glanced at the chess committee list pinned to the records department notice board. Syme's name was no longer there. It hadn't been crossed out, just removed. That was all it took. He no longer existed. He had never existed. Outside, the city baked under relentless heat, while inside the ministry's maze of air-conditioned, windowless offices, the chill of control remained. Hate Week loomed on the horizon, and with it, a wave of orchestrated fury. Every branch of government was at full throttle. Rallies, parades, posters, wax figures, scripted speeches, and doctored photos flowed like a relentless current of propaganda. Julia's team had abandoned their novel-writing task to rush out grotesque atrocity pamphlets. Winston, in turn, buried himself in old editions of the Times, rewriting history for speeches meant to incite rage and blind loyalty. At night, the city vibrated with tension. The proles, once indifferent, were swept into another patriotic storm. Rocket bombs fell with increasing frequency. Whispers spread of unseen forces behind them. The latest propaganda weapon, a brutal marching song for Hate Week, boomed through the telescreens and streets, its rhythm not quite music, but a beating drum of fury. Children echoed its madness with homemade instruments. It became the city's night cry. Parsons, ever enthusiastic, led his block in the feverish preparations. He stitched flags, painted banners, hoisted poles across rooftops, sweating profusely and proudly in the sweltering evenings. His joy seemed boundless, his energy inexhaustible. Victory Mansions alone, he boasted, would display hundreds of meters of bunting. A new image had taken over the city's walls. A towering Eurasian soldier, armed and emotionless, his weapon pointed outward with uncanny precision. No matter where one stood, the muzzle always seemed to follow. It dominated the city, even outnumbering Big Brother's portraits. Fear mingled with fury. Bombings killed dozens in public places. A theater buried its audience. A playground annihilated children. Mourners filled the streets in mourning and outrage. The scapegoats were quickly chosen. An elderly foreign couple accused of espionage were burned alive in their home. Goldstein's face was burned in effigy, his ghost hunted again. Amid this chaos, a small oasis persisted above Mr. Charrington's shop. There, Julia and Winston found something resembling peace. Their bodies slick with sweat, the bed sheets bare, the room overrun with bugs. They didn't care. It was their world. They made love, slept, woke, and lived in fleeting joy. With pepper from the black market and laughter stolen from repression, they built a fragile paradise. They met 7 times in June. Winston no longer needed gin. He felt better, physically and spiritually. His ulcer healed, his cough vanished, his rage had calmed. Though their encounters were brief, the knowledge that the room existed sustained him. It felt untouched by time, a capsule of forgotten life. To lie there under a dusty ceiling in a world that had not yet been erased was enough. Mr. Charrington drifted through his dusty antiques, half merchant, half relic himself. He talked with Winston, softly offering bits of broken memory, snippets of rhymes, odd trinkets, fragments of a world no longer spoken of. He seemed more interested in remembering than selling, And to talk with him was like winding up a music box on its final turn. Both Winston and Julia understood deep down that their sanctuary would not last. There were moments of cold dread when death seemed near and real. But in the warmth of the room, they dreamed of escape, of marriage, even of dying together. None of it was realistic, and they knew it. Even suicide, their one feasible option, felt too distant. They clung to the present, one breath at a time, unwilling to give it up. They often discussed rebellion, though it remained abstract. Winston told Julia of O'Brien, his feeling that something connected them. He fantasized about approaching him, confessing his disloyalty, asking for help. Strangely, Julia did not dismiss this as reckless. She had faith in faces, not ideology, and believed that most people secretly despised the party. But to her, the notion of organized rebellion was fantasy. The Brotherhood was a fiction the party created to control narratives. Her hatred for the party was personal, visceral, but unphilosophical. She had shouted for executions she didn't believe in, joined protests she didn't understand. To her, history was noise. When Winston spoke of shifting war alliances, she shrugged. "I thought we'd always been at war with Eurasia." That scared him. The war with Eastasia had only ended 4 years ago, within her adult memory, yet she barely noticed. She didn't care. One lie bled into another, and it all blurred together. He tried to show her the importance of the past, how its erasure was the party's greatest crime. He recounted his moment with the incriminating photo, the proof he destroyed. She dismissed it. So what? It wouldn't have changed anything. She didn't see the value in dead truths. She only cared about the now, about them. Winston, exasperated, teased, "You're only a rebel from the waist down." She laughed, delighted by his wit, untouched by his fear. Whenever he delved into newspeak, doublethink, or party ideology, Julia's interest waned. She'd fall asleep mid-sentence. It didn't matter to her if the world was built on lies. She already believed nothing was real. She cheered when told, booed when instructed. In her own way, she was sane. She did not grasp the full horror, and so was spared the full weight of it. Through her, Winston saw the terrifying ease with which orthodoxy could be worn like a mask, sincerely and without understanding. The party's greatest triumph wasn't in its terror, but in its ability to make people forget they were prisoners. Truth became meaningless. Lies left no scar. And so the world marched on, flags waving, drums beating, rockets falling, while two lovers dreamed against the current of history. The disappearance of Syme unfolds with chilling simplicity, yet beneath the quiet lies one of the most disturbing truths in Orwell's world. Erasure is more than death. Syme had ceased to exist. He had never existed. With this single sentence, Orwell reveals a terrifying mechanism of control, the ability not only to kill, but to unwrite. Winston's quiet observation of the missing name on the chess committee list is all it takes to understand that reality in Oceania is not fixed. It bends to the party's will. There are no trials, no mourning, not even whispers, just a silent vacuum where a person once was. The lesson here is clear and unsettling. When memory is stolen, resistance becomes impossible. In the absence of shared history, truth dissolves, and what remains is only the version sanctioned by power. Outside, the city swelters under a relentless sun, while inside the ministry, the temperature remains artificially stable. But emotional climates run hot. Hate Week is approaching, and the machinery of manipulation is in full motion. Processions, meetings, military parades, slogans coined, songs written, rumors circulated, photographs faked. Orwell's enumeration evokes a sense of relentless, almost breathless construction of spectacle. Every citizen becomes a cog in the propaganda wheel, including Winston and Julia. Julia no longer writes novels. She now crafts atrocity pamphlets. Winston spends his days rewriting past articles, editing lies to fit the current political agenda. In this society, language itself becomes a tool for domination. What is spoken, printed, remembered, none of it is rooted in truth. The people do not live in reality, but in a constant performance of loyalty. Amid this chaos emerges a new tune, the hate song. Designed as the anthem for Hate Week, its purpose is not to uplift, but to incite. Roared out by hundreds of voices to the tramp of marching feet, it was terrifying. Its beat is not music, but a marching drum. Its melody engineered to stir aggression. That even the children, like the Parsons, mimic it on combs and toilet paper speaks to the reach of its influence. Orwell paints a portrait of a society where even art is hijacked. Where once music expressed longing or beauty, it now becomes a weapon. Here lies a poignant warning. When culture is shaped by control, even our joys can turn to instruments of submission. Parsons himself is an embodiment of joyful obedience. He organizes the street's preparations for Hate Week with exuberant energy, proudly announcing that Victory Mansions alone will show 400 meters of bunting. His devotion is not forced, it is enthusiastic, sincere. And that is what makes him dangerous. Parsons doesn't fake loyalty, he lives it with a sense of fulfillment. This is perhaps Orwell's most disturbing character portrait. Not of a villain, but of a man so immersed in the system that he becomes its living proof. His purpose is his prison, and he wears it like a badge of honor. The lesson here is uncomfortable. The greatest danger to freedom may not be tyrants, but true believers. Suddenly, a new image covers the city, a giant Eurasian soldier with expressionless eyes and a weapon that seems to follow the viewer. From whatever angle you looked, the muzzle of the gun seemed to be pointed straight at you. It has no words, yet it speaks volumes. Fear needs no caption. The population, once apathetic, is stirred into patriotic hysteria. Rocket bombs rain down, some striking theaters, others playgrounds. Grief transforms into outrage. Goldstein is burned in effigy. Shops are looted. An old couple, suspected of being foreigners, are murdered by fire. This isn't accidental chaos. It is engineered panic. The party doesn't just manipulate information, it manipulates emotion. Through fear, it ensures loyalty. And in that fear, humanity is sacrificed. In stark contrast to the madness outside, Julia and Winston carve out a sanctuary above Mr. Charrington's shop. Dirty or clean, the room was paradise. In a regime that forbids personal love, their physical connection becomes a form of rebellion. They strip away their clothes and their fears, clinging to each other like survivors in a storm. Even the bugs crawling across their skin are tolerated. What matters is not comfort, but the simple, radical act of choosing one another. It is in this room, above a junk shop filled with forgotten objects, that they find a piece of the past untouched by ideology. Here, rebellion is not a manifesto, it is a whispered "I love you" beneath an open window. As the month of June progresses, Winston changes. He no longer relies on gin to numb his mind. His body heals. His anger softens. The process of life had ceased to be intolerable. This subtle shift marks a powerful transformation. Healing doesn't require a revolution. Sometimes it only takes space to be, to feel, to breathe without fear. Their encounters may be brief, but the knowledge that the room exists inviolate is enough. It is not escape, but it is sanctuary. And in a world built on lies, even a temporary truth feels like salvation. Mr. Charrington, the shopkeeper, is a curious figure. He does not sell goods so much as memories. He wanders among relics with the air of a collector, offering Winston broken rhymes and fragments of forgotten lore. To talk to him was like listening to the tinkling of a worn-out musical box. His presence reminds us that the past may be battered, but it is not gone. It lingers in corners, in song, in the whisper of old stories. Charrington does not fight the system, but simply by remembering, he resists it. And in that resistance lies a quiet strength. Still, both Winston and Julia understand, though they rarely say it aloud, that their happiness cannot last. The fact of impending death seemed as palpable as the bed they lay on. They fantasize about escape, of marriage, suicide, disappearing into the prole world. But deep down, they know the truth. There is no real escape. Their rebellion is finite, their love borrowed. Yet they continue, wishfully, because even in a doomed present, life clings on. Like lungs that keep drawing breath as long as air exists, the human spirit endures. The instinct to survive, to hold hands in the dark, is stronger than despair. The final message of this chapter is haunting yet strangely comforting. To hang on from day to day and from week to week, spinning out a present that had no future, seemed an unconquerable instinct. In a society that denies history and manipulates hope, the act of loving, remembering, and simply being becomes revolutionary. Orwell does not offer us an easy victory, but he does offer a profound truth that even under the weight of oppression, humanity finds a way to survive, if only in fragments. And that is the lesson worth carrying forward. We resist not only through grand gestures, but through quiet insistence. To remember what was, to love despite fear, to speak truth even if no one hears. For as long as one soul dares to care, the light has not gone out. Winston and Julia sometimes drifted into quiet, speculative conversations about rebelling against the party, not in fiery declarations, but through hesitant questions, half-formed thoughts, and shared restlessness. They had no clear plan, no map of resistance. The idea of the brotherhood lingered more as a myth than a reality, like something glimpsed through a fog. Winston confided in her about his strange sense of connection with O'Brien, a man of the inner party whose gaze once flickered with recognition. He sometimes imagined walking straight into O'Brien's office, declaring himself an enemy of the regime and asking for help. Strangely, Julia didn't find the idea absurd. She was accustomed to trusting her instincts about people's faces and found it entirely plausible that Winston could intuit something in O'Brien. In her mind, almost everyone harbored secret hatred for the party. It was just a matter of safety and timing. Everyone would break the rules if they could do so without risk. But as for the idea of a large, organized rebellion, she dismissed it as fantasy, just another invention of the party to control people's fears and hopes. She was convinced that Goldstein and his underground movement were just boogeymen, part of the script everyone had to pretend to believe. Julia herself had played her part. Countless times she had screamed for the execution of names she didn't know, crimes she didn't believe. During trials, she had stood with the Youth League chanting "Death to the traitors" for hours. And in the 2 minutes hate, she often outshouted everyone, throwing venom at Goldstein's image with performative rage. The irony was she barely knew who Goldstein was or what he represented. Growing up after the revolution, she had no memory of ideological debates or fractured loyalties. For her, the party had always existed and always would. Any rebellion, she believed, could only be private, isolated disobedience, or perhaps a random act of sabotage. In some ways, Julia's instincts were sharper than Winston's, and her mind more naturally immune to propaganda. During one of their conversations, Winston casually referenced the war with Eurasia. Julia replied without hesitation that she didn't think the war was even real. The bombs raining down on London, she guessed, were probably the party's own doing, meant to keep the population afraid and compliant. It was a shocking thought to Winston, one that had never crossed his mind. She even admitted that her biggest struggle during the 2 minutes hate was not to laugh out loud. Yet for all her skepticism, Julia never questioned the party unless it interfered with her directly. When Winston explained the party's shifting historical claims, like who invented the airplane, she shrugged. What did it matter? At school, she had been taught that the party invented airplanes. That was enough for her. Winston tried to explain that such lies weren't harmless, that they distorted not just history, but the very nature of reality. When he told her that 4 years ago the enemy had been Eastasia, not Eurasia, she looked puzzled. "I thought we had always been at war with Eurasia," she said vaguely. It unsettled him. She had been an adult when the war shifted, yet it had passed unnoticed in her mind. He pressed her, eventually jogging her memory. She did recall dimly a time when Eastasia had been the enemy, but the change felt irrelevant. "Who cares?" she snapped. "It's always one bloody war after another, and one knows the news is all lies anyway." Winston, though frustrated, still tried to bring her closer to the truth. He told her about his work in the records department, about the forgeries he committed, rewriting articles, editing the past, turning lies into recorded truths. But Julia was unfazed. She didn't feel the existential weight of it, the sense of standing on a void where history should be. He recounted the case of Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, the party members falsely accused and executed, and the slip of paper he had once held, which proved their innocence. She didn't understand the significance. "Were they friends of yours?" she asked. "No," he replied. "I barely knew them. They were inner party members. They belonged to the old days." "Then what was there to worry about?" she said. "People are being killed off all the time, aren't they?" Winston's response was quiet but insistent. This was different. It wasn't just about people dying. The past itself had been abolished, replaced with whatever the party wanted to be true. Every book, every statue, every photograph, every date altered. History had stopped. The only thing that existed was an eternal present where the party was always right. He explained that although he falsified history himself, even he couldn't prove it was false once the job was done. The truth, when it surfaced, was fleeting. The slip of paper had been real proof, but he had destroyed it. If it happened again, he swore, he would keep it. Julia didn't share his urgency. "I'm quite ready to take risks," she said, "but only for something worth it, not for bits of old newspaper." "What could you have done with it anyway?" Winston admitted he probably couldn't have done much, but maybe, just maybe, it could have sparked doubt in someone else. "Even if we can't change anything now," he said, "small knots of resistance might grow and leave something behind for the next generation." Julia's answer was immediate. "I'm not interested in the next generation. I'm interested in us." Winston smiled sadly. "You're only a rebel from the waist down." She burst into laughter, delighted by the line, and embraced him. Julia had no interest in party doctrine, in doublethink, or the abstract principles of Ingsoc. When Winston tried to explain these concepts, she became bored, confused, or simply drifted into sleep. She had a remarkable ability to fall asleep anywhere, anytime. She knew when to cheer, when to boo, and how to navigate the system without thinking too deeply. For her, it was all noise. Rubbish, as she called it. Why worry about something everyone knew was false? Watching her, Winston realized something profound. The party didn't need to indoctrinate everyone thoroughly. It only needed people to conform outwardly. Julia was proof. She played the role convincingly, yet had no understanding of what the role truly meant. And in many ways, that made her invulnerable. The party's most disturbing triumph wasn't in convincing people of its lies, but in making people indifferent to the difference between truth and lies. Julia swallowed everything because none of it stuck. Like a grain of corn, Winston thought, passing undigested through the body of a bird. It left no mark on her soul. In her own strange way, she remained sane, because she never engaged deeply enough to be broken. In their quiet hours together, Winston and Julia would occasionally speak of rebellion, not with fire, but with a strange mix of curiosity and caution. They dreamed of opposing the party, but neither knew how or where to begin. Even if the Brotherhood were real, its doors remained invisible, locked behind layers of myth and fear. Winston confided in her about his instinctual connection to O'Brien, a man whose fleeting glance had once seemed to speak volumes. Sometimes Winston felt an irrational urge to walk straight into O'Brien's presence, declare his disloyalty, and ask for help. Surprisingly, Julia didn't find that ridiculous. She had a habit of trusting faces, and she thought it natural that Winston should believe O'Brien's eyes told the truth. To her, almost everyone secretly hated the party. They were just too afraid to show it. Rules, she assumed, were broken in private all the time. What she didn't believe in, however, was the idea of organized resistance. The Brotherhood, Goldstein, the underground army, it was all nonsense to her, fiction designed by the party to maintain control. Everyone pretended to believe in the myth, just like they pretended to cheer or hate on cue. Julia had played the part well. At rallies and demonstrations, she had shouted herself hoarse, demanding the death of people she had never heard of, crimes she never understood. She had taken her place among the youth league, chanting, "Death to the traitors," outside the public courts for hours on end. During the infamous 2 minutes hate, her rage was unmatched. And yet, in truth, she had no idea who Goldstein was or what he stood for. She had grown up in a world where the party was eternal, and the ideological wars of previous decades were little more than faded rumors. The very idea of a political movement that wasn't orchestrated by the party didn't register in her mind. For her, the only possible rebellion was small, personal, and uncoordinated, an act of mischief, not revolution. In some ways, Julia possessed a sharper instinct than Winston and was far less vulnerable to the party's narratives. One day when Winston mentioned the war with Eurasia, she casually suggested that the war wasn't even real. Perhaps the rocket bombs that rained down on London were actually launched by the party itself, just to keep people scared. The idea stunned him. It had never crossed his mind. She confessed that her real challenge during the 2 minutes hate was to keep herself from laughing. But Julia's skepticism had limits. She only questioned the system when it touched her directly. Much of the party's myth-making didn't concern her, and so she let it pass. For instance, she firmly believed the party had invented airplanes. It was what she had been taught at school. When Winston explained that airplanes had existed long before the revolution, she shrugged. It simply didn't matter to her who invented what. What mattered was whether it had an impact on her life. What troubled Winston even more was how little she noticed history being rewritten. When he mentioned that just 4 years ago, Oceania had been at war with Eastasia, not Eurasia, she replied vaguely. I thought we'd always been at war with Eurasia. The shift in allegiance hadn't even registered. He pushed her, gently but persistently, until she dimly recalled the truth. Still, she found the entire issue pointless. Who cares, she said. It's always one bloody war after another, and one knows the news is all lies anyway. Her words struck Winston with quiet terror, not because she was wrong, but because she was numb. She had accepted the lie, not as truth, but as background noise, too familiar to question. He often tried to pull her into deeper conversations about the past, the nature of truth, the lies he helped fabricate in the records department. But she remained unaffected. The idea that history could be rewritten without consequence didn't unsettle her. He told her about Jones, Aronson, and Rutherford, the inter-party members who were purged and falsely accused. He recounted the moment he had once held a piece of paper that proved their innocence, a fragment of truth that could have challenged the entire party narrative. Julia's response was not shock, but confusion. Were they friends of yours? She asked. No, Winston answered. They were much older. I barely knew them. Then what was there to worry about? She said. People are being killed off all the time, aren't they? He tried to explain the difference, that it wasn't just about killing someone. It was about erasing the past, about altering memory itself. History has stopped, he said. Nothing exists except an endless present in which the party is always right. Every book, every statue, every date had been changed. And yet, after he destroyed that crucial slip of paper, no evidence remained. All that was left was his memory, and he wasn't sure if anyone else remembered what he did. Still, he insisted, if the same thing happened today, I should keep it. Julia shook her head. Well, I wouldn't. I'm quite ready to take risks, but only for something worthwhile, not for bits of old newspaper. To her, truth was only valuable if it changed something, and in this case, it didn't. She asked him bluntly, "What could you have done with it even if you had kept it?" Winston admitted that perhaps it would have achieved nothing, but he liked to imagine that one day others like him would emerge, small groups, leaving behind bits of truth for the next generation. "Even if we can't change anything in our lifetime," he said, "maybe the future could carry on where we left off." Julia, ever practical, brushed it aside. "I'm not interested in the next generation, dear. I'm interested in us." Her rebellion was deeply personal. She didn't want to fix the system. She wanted to survive within it, to love, to feel, to steal a few precious moments from the machine. Winston looked at her, half in admiration, half in sorrow. "You're only a rebel from the waist down," he said. She burst into laughter, delighted by the remark, and threw her arms around him. She didn't mind the truth of it, didn't care to fight the label. Her joy was in the now, in pleasure, in presence. Whenever Winston tried to speak to her of ideology, of ingsoc, of doublethink, of the party's manipulation of language, she would quickly grow bored. "One knew that it was all rubbish," she would say, "so why let oneself be worried by it?" She understood when to cheer and when to boo, and she did so convincingly. That in her mind was enough. When he persisted, she would often fall asleep mid-sentence, her disinterest almost childlike in its innocence. She was one of those rare people who could sleep at any time, in any place, unburdened by the weight of thought. And yet, Winston realized this very indifference made her strangely invulnerable. The party's ideology imposed itself most effectively on those who didn't try to understand it. For people like Julia, the rules could be followed or broken without consequence because they didn't feel their souls being shaped by them. They could be made to accept the most flagrant violations of reality, Winston thought, because they never fully grasped the enormity of what was demanded of them. Their ignorance protected them. They swallowed lies not because they believed them, but because they had stopped caring whether they were true, and what they swallowed left no trace. Just as a grain of corn, he mused, will pass undigested through the body of a bird. It was a terrifying thought that a lie could pass through a person's mind, do no damage, and leave nothing behind. In such a world, truth became fragile not because it was attacked, but because it was forgotten. In Julia's laughter, her detachment, her sensual presence, Winston saw both freedom and loss. She had reclaimed her body, her moments, her pleasures, but at the cost of memory. He had reclaimed memory, but at the cost of peace. Together, they were rebels of different kinds. She rebelled by feeling, he rebelled by remembering, and perhaps somewhere between them, there still lived a sliver of something powerful. A fragile, flickering resistance in a world that wanted everything to be silence. In the sterile corridors of the ministry, under the unblinking gaze of the telescreens, Winston's reality subtly yet irreversibly shifted. A presence loomed behind him, larger, deliberate, unmistakably intentional. At first, it was a cough, innocuous enough, but Winston knew, in the way one knows an omen without proof, that something significant was about to unfold. When he turned and saw O'Brien standing there, his pulse surged with a blend of anticipation and terror. For years, he had felt the pull of a vague allegiance, a silent resonance between himself and O'Brien, an unspoken agreement that the rules did not entirely apply when they looked at each other. Now, finally, they stood side by side, O'Brien initiating conversation with a polished, controlled kindness that set him apart from his peers in the inner party. He mentioned a recent article Winston had written for the Times praising his command of newspeak and implying that Winston's grasp of the language held a scholarly depth. Winston, still regaining his composure, deflected the compliment, calling himself merely an amateur. Yet O'Brien pressed forward, referencing a so-called friend who had spoken well of Winston, his name forgotten, though Winston immediately thought of Syme. The mention was a tremor in the structure of their world. Syme, once a colleague, now erased, not simply dead but obliterated. an unperson. To mention him was an act of quiet heresy, an encrypted message laced with dangerous intent. And in this moment, Winston understood. O'Brien was signaling something far deeper than admiration. He was inviting Winston into the shadowed fringes of something clandestine. As they continued their walk, O'Brien paused and adjusted his spectacles with disarming familiarity. He shifted the conversation toward the newest edition of the Newspeak Dictionary, claiming he possessed a rare advanced copy. Would Winston be interested? Of course he would. But instead of sending it through formal channels, O'Brien casually suggested Winston pick it up himself from his flat. He offered an address, writing it in full view of a telescreen and handing the slip of paper to Winston without ceremony, as though it were the most mundane of exchanges. What had just transpired lasted only minutes, yet its meaning was explosive. In a world without directories, where personal addresses were secrets zealously guarded, O'Brien had done the unthinkable. He had offered a door, both literal and symbolic, to another existence. It was an invitation, cloaked in civility but blazing with risk. A test, perhaps. A temptation. Winston understood this not with elation, but with the gravity of someone standing at the edge of a cliff long expected. He memorized the address and disposed of the note later in the memory hole, as if performing a sacrament. But the message was already seared into his mind. O'Brien had extended more than an address. He had confirmed the existence of the conspiracy that Winston had only dared to dream about in fragments and shadows. And Winston had stepped closer to it. He knew instinctively that he would go. Not today, perhaps not even tomorrow, but he would go. The journey had already begun long ago with the first rebellious thought, the first pen stroke in the secret diary. This, walking into O'Brien's trap or truth, was merely the next link in a chain forged from silent resistance. Each step had its cost, but he had accepted that quietly long before he even knew he had. He would act. He would align not only his thoughts, but his body and fate with the unspoken rebellion. Yet within him stirred not joy, but a chill. As he left the encounter, his bones seemed to absorb a kind of premonitory dampness, as if he had brushed against the stone wall of a grave that bore his name. The moment he had always expected had arrived, but rather than liberating him, it tethered him more tightly to a fate he feared yet welcomed. For all his fantasies of freedom and truth, Winston could not ignore the sense of a path already sealed, one that would almost certainly end in the ministry of love. O'Brien's calm tone, his suggestion of an interest in language, the gentle praise, and the final offering of the address, none of it was accidental. Every word was chosen, every gesture rehearsed. Winston was not only being watched, he was being courted, carefully drawn in with intellectual bait and the illusion of kinship. But beneath it all pulsed the danger of entrapment, of seduction into a machinery far larger and colder than any rebellion could ever conquer. Still, the spell had been cast. O'Brien was not a symbol anymore. He was a man with a flat, a dictionary, and the power to either crush or awaken. And Winston, for all his fear, found himself already shifting from thought to deed, crossing into a realm where the line between bravery and betrayal blurred, and where the next step would define not just his life, but his soul. He walked away with a sense of inevitability weighing on him. The paper was gone, but the path it opened remained. Something ancient and irreversible had begun to move. Not loudly, not with banners or trumpets, but with a note, a cough, a compliment, and the smallest, most devastating offering, an address. In this quietly powerful chapter of 1984, George Orwell weaves a pivotal encounter, brief in duration, yet immense in consequence, between Winston and the enigmatic O'Brien. Beneath every gesture, each line of dialogue, and even in the silence between words, there pulses a charged atmosphere of danger, hope, and inevitability. This is not merely a plot twist. It is a profound exploration of human longing for connection, meaning, and rebellion against the invisible bars of totalitarian control. It had happened at last. The expected message had come. The story opens with a sense of fulfilled prophecy. Winston feels as though his entire life has led to this very moment, where anticipation meets reality. There's a quiet echo of destiny in that sentence. Orwell suggests that sometimes the moments we fear and yearn for most arrive not with fanfare, but with a subtle shift in the air. This reinforces the idea that human beings often live on the edge of internal revolutions, waiting for an external sign to give shape to their unrest. It's a tender reminder. Within each of us lies a threshold we know we must cross, even if it leads to uncertainty. As Winston realizes he is being followed, a soft cough becomes the prelude to change. This seemingly trivial detail, the cough, is masterful. It's an ordinary sound, but here it signals the extraordinary. When he turns and sees O'Brien, every heartbeat carries the weight of fear and hope. In this fragile moment, Orwell invites us to reflect on the quiet thresholds in our own lives, how a single look, a pause, a few words can mark the beginning of transformation. There's something universal here, the sacredness of first steps toward truth. I had been hoping for an opportunity of talking to you. O'Brien's words seem simple, even cordial. But for Winston, they're loaded with subtext. This line speaks to the hunger for recognition, for shared understanding. Under a regime where genuine conversations are rare and dangerous, being seen, truly seen, is as shocking as it is exhilarating. The moment encourages us to examine the times we've longed for a kindred spirit, someone who not only speaks to us, but speaks our hidden language. Orwell shows us the emotional poverty of a world where language is policed and intimacy is treason. O'Brien's deliberate mention of Syme, an unperson, becomes a profound gesture. It is a code, a risk, a whisper that defies the regime's loud silencing. For Winston, this is proof that he is not alone in his doubts. In a world where even memory is subject to vaporization, recalling someone forbidden is both an act of defiance and an offer of trust. Here lies a haunting question for all of us. What truths have we been conditioned to forget, and who dares remind us of them? O'Brien's mention of the 10th edition of the Newspeak Dictionary may appear academic, even mundane, but Orwell subtly layers it with danger and invitation. The reduction in the number of verbs is more than linguistic streamlining. It is a war against complexity, a flattening of thought. Orwell reminds us that language shapes reality. By reducing the words we have to think with, regimes reduce our ability to rebel, to dream, to feel fully. The lesson here is gentle but firm. Guard your language, for it guards your freedom. Perhaps you could pick it up at my flat. This moment crystallizes the entire exchange into a single, devastatingly intimate act. O'Brien gives Winston his address. In a world without directories, where privacy is annihilated and identities are policed, to share one's location is either a trap or a testament of solidarity. This is the chapter's beating heart. Trust, or the illusion of it, is the most potent weapon of control. And yet, Orwell shows how even the whisper of trust can stir the soul into action. It is here that the narrative tilts. Winston, for the first time, has a door to walk through. The detail that O'Brien writes the address directly in view of a telescreen underscores the terrifying duality of life under the party. Every action is visible, every word may be a test, and yet, even in the bright eye of surveillance, rebellion begins, not always with explosions, but with a note handed in daylight. Orwell forces us to reflect. Where do we find our moments of courage? Sometimes it's in plain sight, sometimes it's masked as politeness. Winston does not keep the address. He memorizes it and disposes of the paper. This ritual is both self-protective and symbolic. To retain forbidden knowledge, he must destroy the evidence. The contrast between mind and matter is sharp. What is remembered becomes sacred, almost invulnerable. This scene stirs a modern echo. In a world of digital tracking and surveillance, what we carry within, our values, doubts, convictions, may be the last private territory we possess. Winston recognizes this encounter not as the start of something, but the middle point of a long internal journey. The first step had been a secret, involuntary thought. Orwell beautifully sketches the quiet escalation from thought to action. Each phase, thinking, writing, speaking, meeting, is part of a progression that leads toward both truth and doom. The insight is profound. We do not stumble into destiny. We follow it one deliberate choice at a time. Even our smallest rebellions can chart the course of our future. It was like a foretaste of death. In this final reflection, Winston is gripped by an almost spiritual awareness of consequence. He likens the moment to stepping into a grave, cold, irreversible, inevitable. Orwell doesn't dramatize this with panic. Instead, he invokes a calm, creeping fear that many readers will recognize. The fear of knowing too much, of crossing a line that cannot be uncrossed. But there is dignity in this fear. It suggests awareness, and the moral clarity to face one's path with open eyes. Courage begins in silence. Winston's journey reminds us that before every visible act of defiance lies a quiet seed, an unsettling thought, a quiet doubt, a moment of wondering. Orwell tells us, cherish these thoughts, for they are the birthplace of transformation. Language is power. The control of words is the control of meaning. When verbs are reduced, so is our ability to act. When names are erased, so are our histories. We are urged to defend complexity, nuance, and memory. Trust is both salvation and weapon. O'Brien embodies the seductive face of the regime, the smiling mask that invites you in while preparing the noose. Orwell warns us gently, not all kindness is genuine, but still, the longing to trust is deeply human. Memory resists tyranny. In a world where paper can be burned and facts rewritten, memory remains a radical act. What we choose to remember, and to whom we pass that memory, is a quiet, potent rebellion. Every step matters. Winston's path from thought to action unfolds gradually, yet with terrible momentum. Orwell invites us to see our own choices, however small, as threads in a larger tapestry. Each action pulls us closer to who we are becoming. Awareness is not always freedom, but it is the beginning of it. Even as Winston feels the chill of fate closing in, he walks forward. That perhaps is Orwell's quietest yet most enduring lesson. The soul, once awakened, cannot return to sleep. This chapter, though brief, is one of the most emotionally resonant in the novel. It captures the fragile hope and terrifying consequence of awakening in a world determined to keep you numb. And in doing so, it reminds us all, awareness may not always bring comfort, but it brings truth. And from truth, the possibility of change. As O'Brien's handwritten address slips into Winston's hand, something far more dangerous is exchanged. Trust. The dream of resistance now has a name, a doorway, and perhaps a trap. Every word between them was loaded, every gesture a signal. And Winston knew the line from thought to action had been crossed. The end was already there, folded into the beginning. If this glimpse into rebellion, illusion, and forbidden love left you reflecting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. In the next chapter, we'll follow Winston through that open door and into the beating heart of the party's darkest secret. Are you ready to see what lies beyond the threshold? As O'Brien's handwritten address slips into Winston's hand, something far more dangerous is exchanged. Trust. The dream of resistance now has a name, a doorway, and perhaps a trap. Every word between them was loaded, every gesture a signal, and Winston knew the line from thought to action had been crossed. The end was already there, folded into the beginning. If this glimpse into rebellion, illusion, and forbidden love left you reflecting, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. In the next chapter, we'll follow Winston through that open door and into the beating heart of the party's darkest secret. Are you ready to see what lies beyond the threshold?